right now they're again having to reorganize their economy because in light of the economic collapse that's recently happened, it's been difficult to maintain the tourist sector of the economy. And you know, their recent economic reforms are being done in the need to reorganize the economy now to another way, not to be, for example, taxi drivers, the state taxi drivers in the tourist sector. Well, if people aren't coming and there's no one to ride their thing, they just kind of sit around and collect their check, and that's not good for the economy, right? So they've had to reorganize that. Cuba is always able to bring itself up, whether it's been the blockade of the U.S. and they're standing strong. And now with Bolivia and Venezuela, you know, Cuba is part of a growing sect of nations. Fidel Castro recently just published a new book. He's concerned about the danger of nuclear weapons and the possibility of the U.S. attacking Iran. And, you know, the Cuban Revolution stands tall. So that's really what I've got in terms of that. So if we want to stretch our legs, and then we can just have a discussion. So, sounds good. Thank you.
There are a lot of people who say that Che was a mass murderer.
Right.
I've never heard
Yes, that's correct.
I've never heard anybody cite sources on it, but it seems to be a common refrain. So do you know anything of what
Yes.
they're speaking of?
Okay. There is a book that came out, The Real History of Che Guevara, Beyond the T-shirt. There's also like been some pieces on television attacking Che Guevara. But what all of that is based on, well, first of all, there's the fact that Che's image is popular. It's on T-shirts, right? And there's a feeling on the right wing that nothing that's communist should be popular. But if you actually read the text of what they have, which I actually have read the true history of Che Guevara, and what they base it on is, first of all, after the revolution, there were war criminals in the government of Batista, right? The government of Batista began in its desperation began bombing villages, like just entire villages, just decimating them. One of the first uses of napalm in the world was against civilians in Cuba by the Batista government in trying to stay in office. And after the revolution, there were a lot of executions of these, war criminals from the former regime. So that's partly what it's based on. Other stuff is just kind of hearsay, you know, because he was a revolutionary. So if you can say, well, I was in the village here in this time, you know, and also there's a lot of folks in Miami Miami, you know, a lot of the folks they call them the Gusanos. And those are the people who used to own the fruit plantations, or were the high-level management figures, or the bankers, or the, you know, and they blame Castro for the fact that they're not living high on the Cuban island, and so, you know, they will, I mean, you can make something up and said Castro's bad, and they would sign their name next to it. And, you know, let's keep in mind that Luis Posada Carriles, right?
Never heard of it.
Okay, now he is a U.S. He is a leader of, he was a CIA agent, and he blew up a Cuban airplane full of school children and killed 73 children, right? And he currently lives in Miami and is on his way to become a U.S. citizen because they won't extradite him to Cuba because he's a freedom fighter, supposedly. You know.
What was the purpose in blowing up the plane?
To hurt Cuba, because, you know, Cuba is an evil communist, right? There are the U.S. is, you know, there are terrorist groups in Miami that frequently go to Cuba and commit crimes against humanity. You know, I know even in 1985, Ronald Reagan had this project, and he created TV Marti, and it was a TV station that was going to, you know, broadcast anti-Cuba anti-government propaganda all through Cuba, and it was named after Jose Marti, the great Cuban radical. So in response, Fidel Castro started broadcasting. Or the government began broadcasting anti-U.S. propaganda on AM and FM radio that went as far as Kansas, and so pretty soon the deal was made. They would cut off TV Marti if they cut off the. You can still get Cuban radio on shortwave. In English, yes, they have English broadcasts every evening beginning at 9 o'clock in English on shortwave radio, so you can listen to that. And I listen to it. It's pretty good, and they've got the drums and the trumpets, you know, and they just report on what's going on. They have really good world news as well. And also keep in mind that, you know, one section of Cuba is actually under U.S. domain.
Guantanamo.
Guantanamo, right, and
it's just a military base.
Yeah. Well,
just prison camp.
Right, yeah, just a military base, though. I mean, that's the thing. You know, to have another country's military base on your island, you know.
Not a very choice use.
Right.
But it's not like a huge section. So.
Right. Yeah. But
Well, then the other thing that they have against Che is that he's the only communist with a baseball stadium named after him. Che Stadium.
all righty then.
Which where?
Bronx.
Shea.
Shea Stadium.
Ted and I got married in 1959, and Workers' World Party was formed shortly thereafter. Okay. At any rate, in the first year after the revolution, they had their literacy campaign, and people, everybody, the high school age kids went out into the countryside to teach people how to read and write. And I remember that one of the people was interviewed who spoke with Fidel, and she had been a slave. She was old enough to have been a slave, and she wanted Fidel to send her somebody who would record. He said, "But Mother, you learned how to read and write, didn't you?" She said, "Yes." He said, "You can put it down yourself in your own words. You don't need anybody." She was a very elderly lady. I remember that, but the amount of enthusiasm, and you have to remember that the national drink of Cuba is coffee, and it's high-powered coffee, let me tell you. There's no such thing as decaffeinated, and they grow their own, and the whole country is high on coffee. You get it for breakfast. They make it with café con leche, with hot milk, and of course loads of sugar. There's no shortage of that.
We lived in South Florida at one point.
Yeah,
We lived off of it.
Yeah, I'm from South Florida. That's where I was born and raised.
So you know.
Getting the shot glass.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of great Cuban culture in South Florida. The food, the drink, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And it is high octane. That is true. Little dabble do you?
By the way, I heard Che Guevara.
Really?
Che came to the United States to speak before the United Nations, and I was present, and I heard him speak, but of course he spoke in Spanish, naturally, and...
Well, the clip of him speaking at the UN is on the YouTube, and...
Is it?
Yes. And what he said was mainly that he said, we in Cuba don't trust imperialism. He said, he was listing the crimes, and he said, imperialism reduces people to, evil beasts. He said, the Nazis, or the people who murdered the people in Belgian Congo, or the U.S. imperialists in Vietnam. He says they're all, it reduces people to bestial cruelty and imperialism.
Yeah.
We will never trust imperialism. It was a very short speech, from what I understand.
Yeah.